Picture me in a cave 40,000 years ago. Another human, same fire, same shadows, but a different species. Neanderthal. But wait, he's stronger than me. Bigger brain, too. He's outlasted ice ages I can't even wrap my head around. So why am I the one standing here telling you about it, and not him? Quick question before we dig in. You into this kind of prehistory mystery? Or want me to cover something totally different next time? Drop it in the comments, I read everyone. Alright, back to the cave. First, drop the caveman idiot image. Neanderthals had none of that going on. Bigger brains than ours. They made tools, controlled fire, buried their dead. Some evidence points to jewelry, eagle talons strung together. They held their ground in brutal European winters for over 300,000 years before we ever showed up. My ancestors, Homo Sapiens, left Africa maybe 70,000 years ago and walked straight into a world Neanderthals already owned. Here's a thing most people skip over. You've got to imagine what that looked like. We weren't marching in with flags planted and kingdoms behind us. This happened over thousands of years. Small groups moving a little farther every generation. Following rivers, following animals, meeting people who looked almost like them, but not quite. For thousands of years, we lived alongside them. Overlapped territory, interbred, even. That's why if your ancestry traces outside Africa, you're carrying actual Neanderthal DNA right now. Go check your DNA test if you've taken one. So the real question isn't who was better, it's what finally tipped things one way. Because if this was just about strength, Neanderthals should have won. If it was just about surviving the cold, they should have won. If it was just about experience, they had us beat by hundreds of thousands of years. So something else had to matter more. Let's get rid of a common assumption right now. Bigger brain doesn't automatically mean smarter. Don't believe me? Einstein's brain weighed in about 18% below average. Scientists who studied it after his death found nothing impressive about its size. What stood out were specific regions, like his parietal lobes, running about 15% wider than normal. Size wasn't the story. Wiring was. Neanderthal brains were about 10% larger than ours. But size alone doesn't tell you much. What matters is what the brain's actually built to do. We were wired differently. What we didn't know until fairly recent skull studies, Neanderthal brains gave more space to vision and body control to survive the cold. Ours leaned harder into the frontal and parietal regions, the areas tied to planning and social reasoning, not bigger, just wired differently. And that difference might be where everything else starts. Here's something simple that mattered more than you'd think. We talked to more people, socialized, and formed connections over much greater distances. We weren't just stuck in our own backyard. Archaeologists have found obsidian, shells, and ochre hundreds of kilometers from where they originated, meaning early Homo sapiens groups were trading across serious distances. Neanderthal groups mostly stayed local. Small bands, rarely connecting with strangers. Imagine living your entire life and never meeting anyone outside the handful of people you already knew. Now imagine knowing there are people 2 or 3 valleys over, people with better stone, better hunting grounds, maybe somebody's cousin married into their group 20 years ago. That's a completely different world. But wait, why would that matter for survival? Because a small, isolated group is one bad winter away from disappearing. A network of groups swapping tools, ideas, even mates. That's a backup plan built into the system. One valley fails, the rest keeps going. We weren't just thinking bigger individually. We were thinking bigger as a group, connected across dozens of tribes instead of boxed into one. Now, the uglier side of survival. For a long time, Neanderthals hunted up close, thrusting spears, grappling a bison at arm's length. Their skeletons show it. Fracture patterns similar to what you'd see in rodeo riders today. And it isn't just about surviving the hunt. If your best hunter breaks a leg, you've lost food. You've lost experience. You've lost somebody teaching the kids. One injury echoes through the whole group. Homo sapiens figured out distance. Spear throwers eventually bows. We could take something down without ever getting close enough to catch a horn to the ribs. Here's a thing that matters more than it sounds. Fewer hunting injuries mean fewer deaths. Fewer deaths meant the population could grow faster, and population growth can quietly decide everything. They fought their prey up close. We kept our distance and let the numbers do the work. None of this happened in isolation. The climate itself was falling apart around them. This wasn't one long ice age. Europe kept flipping back and forth. Cold, warmer, cold again. Forests became open grasslands. Grasslands turned back into forest. The animals moved. The food moved. If your whole way of life depends on one kind of landscape, that's a problem. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe went through rapid swings between warming and cooling. Neanderthal populations were already thin, spread across land that couldn't support their hunting style anymore. Homo sapiens had wider trade networks, a broader diet, fish, plants, small and large game, and bigger connected populations. When one food source disappeared, there were more options left to fall back on. Before we could really read ancient DNA, we had no idea. But now, we can see it. Some of these groups were already shrinking and inbreeding before we arrived in any real numbers. We might not have been the invading force that wiped them out. We may have just been the ones still standing when the climate did most of the damage. This wasn't a war between our two species, more a matter of who had better odds when things went wrong. And here's the part that still gets me. We didn't just replace them, we merged. That's the weird part. For most of history, people imagined Neanderthals as this failed side branch, like they just disappeared. But they didn't completely disappear. They became part of us. That's why this story isn't really about winners and losers. It's about two human species meeting, and one of them living on inside the other. Anyone with non-African ancestry carries somewhere between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Genes tied to skin, hair, even parts of the immune system trace back to them. Here's a thing worth sitting with. Neanderthals didn't fully vanish. They folded into us. You and I, if either of us traces back outside Africa, could be carrying one of those genes right now, quietly doing its job somewhere in our bodies. So, bigger brain, more raw strength, 300,000 years of experience surviving Europe. Still wasn't enough. What actually won out was connection. Networks. The willingness to trade with someone 3 valleys over instead of staying put. Maybe that's the real takeaway. Extinction doesn't always come for the strongest. It comes for whoever's isolated. And maybe outcompete isn't even the right word. You and I are walking around with a piece of them still in us. They didn't lose so much as get absorbed into whatever we turned into. If you made it this far, let me know below. Same kind of topic next time, or something completely different. See you in the next one.